If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What's the creepiest thing you've ever experienced when you've been alone? Let me set the scene for you. 4 a.m. November in northern Minnesota. It's about at 10 degrees Fahrenheit outside and windy. I'm about a mile from the trailer I stay in while deer hunting and about another mile from my stand for that day. We're on a large property with 3 other people. No neighbors this time of year within 5 miles of our property, and the nearest town is 20 miles down the freeway. A few flakes of snow cut through the moonlight that guides my trail. Total silence, it's near deafening. Now that sounds creepy and peaceful at once. Like some relaxing isolation from the world. I agree, it's truly peaceful, and so beautiful. I have been hunting this property for 3 years now, and my family has been for the past 100 years. The white-tailed deer here are plentiful and the wildlife is so fantastic. I've seen wolves many times, but they don't scare me, they mostly leave people alone. As I've been walking for the past 20 minutes or so along a thin trail on the southern end of my property, I hear a noise that makes every hair on my neck stand up. It's hard to describe, like a woman screaming and an animal howling mixed together. It pierced through the silent night, like a knife through the air. I cannot describe it, but it was terrifying. I know it was a puma, as they had been seen in the area before. But it felt genuinely supernatural, and the fear I felt was immeasurable. I understand how stories of wendigos and other cryptids have continued throughout the years. There's something so primal about it, hearing a noise like that, it's forever etched into my mind. It reminded me that I wasn't the all-powerful being in those woods, and I should follow the rules of the forest. I grew up with a little under 300 acres of woods behind my house. I spent a lot of time alone out there. One night while cutting through I was followed. Now understand, these woods were mine. All of my life, night and day, I roamed them. I knew every animal type, how to recognize and catch each. I would sneak out at night running around barefoot with a spear or knife. Whatever followed me stayed just out of my eyesight. And at some point it made a noise that sounded somewhere between a baby crying and a cat noise. It's not like anything I've ever heard. I left that night thinking fox, but I have more than once tried researching the sound. I won't ever forget it. It's not the only time we've heard it. Whatever it was would come around the house sometimes early in the AM, like 3 to 5 a.m. My dad talked about it years later. He never confirmed it when I was younger, as he knew I'd try to hunt it. That being said, whatever it was intelligent and knew how to keep out of view. And as far as I know, that story being 30 years old, that thing still wanders the area? When I was in 9th grade walking to the bus stop, it was still dark out and eerily calm, no traffic and very quiet, but the second I stepped onto the street from my driveway, it felt like there was some kind of mild static electricity in the air, if that makes sense. Anyways, my bus stop was half a block from my house, on the corner, with one street light above it and some pine trees and shrubs that lined the street. I was looking at the ground as I walked up the hill toward the bus stop, and just before I crossed the street I finally looked up to see if the other kid was already there. He wasn't. Instead, standing directly under the street light, was this maybe 3.5 feet tall alien? Facing its body toward me, staring at me. I stopped in my tracks and stared for a second, paralyzed with fear. This thing was like 3.5 feet tall, with grayish/bluish/whitish skin. I could see blue veins under its skin which seemed almost translucent or thin, no clothing, no hair at all, no noticeable genitalia. Its head was large with sort of a flattish top that became bulbous around the forehead area, tapered in a bit at the temple area, then bulbous cheekbone area, then tapered down to a flattish chin, and the eyes were larger and more spaced out than a human's eyes. I didn't take note of its nose, and the mouth was like a small slit and closed. The arms were too long for its body and at its sides. I guess I didn't take note of its hands. It kind of had a flat chest with small pectoral muscles but no nipples, with a wider protruding lower stomach, wide-set hips, short legs that looked more along the lines of a hooved animal when they stand on their hind legs, but with humanoid feet. This thing just stood there under the street light facing me, and staring at me, and only 20 to 30 feet away from me. I would guess I stood there for maybe 3 to 5 seconds staring at it, frozen with fear and confusion, trying to figure out what the fuck I was staring at. When my brain caught up with me, I ran as fast as I could back home, slammed the doors shut, and was inconsolably crying and hyperventilating. My parents were confused and horrified as to what happened to me in the 3 minutes I was gone. My mom had to literally help me walk to the nearest chair. I didn't go to school that day. My dad stayed home because I was too scared to be alone. After I calmed down, I took a nap and woke up fucking 8 hours later to my mom when she got home from work. It felt like I had literally just closed my eyes, then opened them to my mom, who had worked an entire shift at work. This is long and hopefully I explained it well enough. Scariest day of my life. When I was a kid visiting my grandma, I would sometimes be there at the same time my grandma's best friend's grandkids were in town and I would play with them at her house. It was a large, old house with a turret-like staircase and narrow hallways. I was never there for more than a few hours, so there was only ever one time I needed to use the restroom. I was directed upstairs, first door on the right, but the second I got to the top of the stairs I had the absolute worst feeling, like someone, it felt like with the energy of a young girl, was staring at me from down the hall. It was so bad I considered turning around and just holding it. When I went in the restroom itself I could only think, get out of here as fast as you can. I finished as quickly as possible and ran back downstairs, but was kicking myself the rest of the day because I felt ridiculous for being so afraid of nothing in broad daylight and many people just right downstairs. Years later I recalled that moment to my mom and she chuckled, saying that was bizarre. I asked her why and she told me the story about when my grandma's friend moved into that house. They found a window outside unaccounted for inside on the second story and had to break a wall down to find it. They found a body along with it, a girl with both wrists chained to the wall, mummified but still had hair remaining and wearing a dress. It was speculated her parents had chained her then built the wall in front of her, alive. They skipped town a while after that. Needless to say I definitely don't go over there with a full bladder anymore, even as an adult. I got off the bus one night coming home from work. A guy also got off at my stop but I didn't think much of it, and started walking the couple blocks I had to walk to get to my apartment. I heard footsteps behind me and realized that guy was still walking behind me. Okay, maybe he walks the same route, whatever. As I was getting closer to my building I felt like the steps sounded faster, like half walk, half running toward me. I started to panic because at this time I didn't have a cell phone or any way to call for help. I noticed another man walking on the opposite side of the street, and he started crossing towards me as well. At that moment I got to my yard and jogged up to the door and threw it open, and as I did I heard the one behind me say, "Hey, wait." As I slammed the door shut and locked it. There was a window in the door and we locked eyes. He was standing in the middle of the yard just staring at me, way closer than I even thought he was. He turned and said something to the guy that had been on the other side of the road that I couldn't hear, and they walked off together. I was kind of stunned as to what just happened. I had a heavy, nauseous feeling in my stomach, like I'd just barely escaped something horrible. After that I always had my boyfriend meet me at the bus stop and walk me home. Without going into too much background, when I was a younger man I wound up in an Alaska native village in the middle of December. Temperatures hovered around 0 degrees, which was considered warm at that time of year, and when the plane landed I had the honor of meeting with the village chief. When I walked up to him he shook my hand, welcomed me to the village, told me where I would be staying and then gave me 3 warnings. 1. Stay away from the village scrapyard at night because they had been seeing ghosts. 2. Don't follow the little people into the woods. 3. Don't go out at night alone, be on the lookout for Sasquatch. I don't remember what word he used for Sasquatch because it was a native word, but he described Bigfoot to a T. Obviously I'm a little incredulous, but whatever. The first few days passed just fine with no issues. But day 4 or 5 of my visit rolls around and I was invited to community dinner they were holding at the church that evening. I was staying at what would eventually be an old folks home when it was approved by the state that was about a mile away. The church/community building had motion-activated security lights on all 4 corners, and my game as I walked to the church in the evenings was to guess where the lights would kick on. This is fairly important. That night I asked a couple of the guys that came with me if they wanted to go to the community meal and turned it down, so I went by myself. Despite being in the bush and butted up against a mountain, the road from the old folks home to the church was fairly straight, and I could see most of the way to it, so I went by myself. About halfway to the church I began hearing echoes of my footsteps in the woods to my left. There was a short section of woods before the ground lifted up sharply to the foothills of some mountains. At night it was well below 0 and the snow crunches and squeaks under your feet when it's that cold. I figured my footsteps were echoing off the hill. At some point the timing of the echo seemed off to me, so I stopped and echoes stopped immediately. So I walked another 100 feet or so, then stopped suddenly. This time the echoing footsteps took a few extra steps. Okay, I thought, there is a wolf or something in woods stalking me. So I quickened to just short of a jog and the echoes sped up. As I got closer to the church I realized that whatever was in woods was going faster than me, and judging by the echoes it was on 2 legs, not 4. If you've never been in the Alaskan bush you need to understand that there is no such thing as jogging through the brush. The alder brush is so thick you work your way through it slowly. The only thing I've seen run through alder brush is full-grown brown bear and moose, and they make a racket. This thing was running through like there was no brush at all. I didn't hear branches breaking, just those footsteps. When I got closer to the church the security lights on the corners facing the road I was on and in the woods next to me were off. By this time whatever was in the woods was ahead of me, and as we got closer to the church the security lights facing the woods turned on first and the footsteps in the woods stopped. I was probably 200 feet away from the church and I went into a full sprint at this point. I got to the church and went inside and sat at a table in the back. One of the natives came up and started talking to me. I must have looked a little shaken because he asked if saw anything and I told him the quick version. He kinda nodded his head and walked away. About 10 minutes later 2 girls in their teens came running and sobbing saying that got chased by a Bigfoot. I don't know what was in the woods other than to say something was definitely there. Something was following me and something chased those girls. Wasn't entirely alone. Was watching TV with my sister, parents were out, when we heard what sounded like footsteps coming down the stairs, bi-level house, stairs located at the back of the sofa. We both turned around and saw a shadow figure, looked like a shadow man, walk down the stairs, out of front entrance and disappear. It was scary as fuck, especially because we both saw it. Recently we were having dinner as a family and we got to talking about spirits/ghosts and my dad jokingly asked if we'd ever encountered any. My sister and I confirmed yes and in the house. My mom then asks, "Is it the shadow figure? I've seen it too, seems pretty harmless." My mom is a good Catholic girl. It definitely spooked us because we had never told them and my mom confirmed seeing it too but was oddly calm about it. I have a hillside out my bedroom window, and it leads from our backyard up onto someone else's property. I always hear rustling from the animals that reside in it, but one night I heard a voice speaking. I turned on the backlight and there was nothing there. Went about my business assuming it was echoing down the hill. Then I heard a guitar playing, clear as day. I wait a moment, turn on the light again, and it stops. About an hour goes by, and I hear nothing else and start to fall asleep. That's when I heard running, loud footsteps. As if someone was jetting down the hillside from my window. They stopped just as suddenly as they started. Thinking it was a coyote or large dog, I clashed my hands twice to scare it off. That's when whatever it was, clapped their hands twice. Moved my bed away from the wall, and the window hasn't been open since. The morning I woke up, and looked around outside with my dog. He refused to go to the backyard. That's when it dawned on me. About 5 years earlier, my brother shot and killed himself in that very hillside. Now I avoid it as much as possible. I wasn't alone for all of it, but here goes. Last year I was up in the mountains during heavy snow to do some snow sports and camp out. Me and my friends were playing manhunt in the woods at night. I know, smart idea, right? And me and another girl went to go hide. For those of you who haven't heard of it, manhunt is basically like extreme hide and seek. We were both wearing dark clothing, and since it was snowy the wood was damp and dark, so we had the idea to crouch behind a giant stump and blend in, which worked pretty well. So well that I guess the other things in the woods didn't notice us either. Soon we heard voices nearby and she decided this spot was too cold to hide, and so she took the opportunity to make a run for it, although we were supposed to stay together in pairs for safety. I didn't want to follow yet though because I was sure they'd spot us too easily. As soon as she bolted away and I heard the voices of the other players get further away, I heard a crack. Confused and thinking I was caught, I whipped around and saw someone standing beside a tree close by. I breathed a sigh of relief thinking it was just someone else hiding we hadn't noticed before. That's when I noticed something wrong. I could see their boot and their leg, but they were weirdly big. I caught some movement toward the top of the tree and looked up to see a bearded green face staring down at me with eyes that, surprisingly, looked just as startled as I felt. At this point my brain seemed to malfunctioning, and all I could think was giant, oh my gosh, that's a giant. As this thing froze, probably wondering if I could see it. Then it fell apart and I nearly had a heart attack, until I realized this wasn't a giant, but 3 short bearded men that had been standing on each other's shoulders. They rolled behind the tree and disappeared. My instincts told me to run, but my legs instantly sent me scrambling toward the tree to see where they'd gone. They'd vanished completely. I was wondering if I had gone insane when I heard the voice of a girl behind me. What was that? The freaking Lorax? And I turned to see my friend had returned to get me and was staring open-mouthed at the tree. Apparently she only saw one of them, but at least I know someone else saw something too. We have a theory they were Ilshie, forest guardians that can be dangerous, but thankfully these ones didn't seem harmful, although maybe that was just because they were just as surprised to see me as I was them. I have so many stories of the woods near my house growing up, but this one sticks with me like glue. I was walking to high school one morning. The way my street was set up, I could walk all the way down right and up a street and then left or cut left through the woods that had a path next to a power plant thing and cut my walking time in half. Well, of course I would usually chose the woods path since it was faster. This one morning in particular it was pretty dark out, so I was already on edge. I rarely used my flashlight since my eyes would usually adjust to the light, and it's not a very long walk. Well, as I was walking, I noticed something on the path in front of me. It was far enough at first it looked like a deer laying down. I curiously walked a bit closer but only really saw an outline. My heart was pounding. I suddenly had this feeling of dread. It turned its head towards me and slowly began moving across the path. It looked like a naked human crawling into the woods. I took a few seconds and realized I had to either pass by where it headed into the woods, or turn around and make my way back through the woods to my house. I took off running down that path to the street. I don't know what it was, a hurt animal, a demented person. I just can't get it out of my head, that it turned and looked at me silently and slowly crawled away. It was humanoid but not quite a person. One of my creepier experiences. I remember it from time to time when I'm outside at night, even states away. When I was 15, I was walking home from school. It was October and raining like a motherfucker. I didn't take the bus because it was crowded, so I decided to walk for 30 minutes in rain like the edgy teen I was. There was a shortcut going through a park. Imagine it like this: lots of trees and bushes surrounding the area and not as many alley paths as a usual park. My way goes through one of the small alleys. On both sides there are trees and no one but myself around at the moment. So I walk, taking pics of the nature here and there when I hear footsteps. I try to keep walking as if I hear nothing. I try to look around subtly to see if there's someone behind me. I gather the courage to turn around, but as you guessed it, no one was there. I start walking again. I kept hearing footsteps. Later that night, I was taking a shower at around 23:30, minding my own business, when I hear the same heavy footsteps, dragging across the corridor. My heart was about to explode. The only people at the apartment at the time besides me were my mom and my grandma, and they were both asleep. The footsteps stopped. I thought maybe I was making it up inside my head. I wish I was. Then, the door handle was pressed down. I grabbed the shower head and turned the water to boiling hot. At least if someone or something was about to murder me, I could as well burn the shit out of the motherfucker. But the door never opened. I stood there for what seemed like hours. I finished my shower and built the courage to walk out of the bathroom. Everything seemed peaceful. When I entered the living room, I saw my cat sitting tensely, staring at me. At least I think it was at me. On the next day, I asked my mom and grandma if they happened to be awake around that time. They shook their heads. I told them about what happened, but they of course didn't believe it. I was hunting out in the mountains of Idaho between Mackay and Arco on September 2nd of 2019. 2 miles up Pass Creek to be more specific. I was 2 miles up the canyon and about a mile up this hillside hunting black bear, approximately 75 to 100 yards from a supposed bear den that my uncle had shown me 2 days prior. That morning my relatives and family had packed up and left, leaving me alone. I rode my another uncle's four-wheeler up the other side of the canyon after they left. I went up to the supposed bear den about 4 in the afternoon and parked the four-wheeler about 150 to 200 yards down the hill to hide my presence to any animals I may be able to shoot. Once in position, I'd been sitting there about 30 to 45 minutes before I began to feel like I needed to get the hell off that mountain. Not strong but definitely unnerving. I brushed it off and continued to sit in wait of my prey. As I sat there, I heard noises in every direction. Nothing unnatural, but definitely that something was there. Behind me I'd hear what sounded like something creeping through the dry grass, followed shortly after by like a twig breaking in the opposite direction. Then off to my right I'd hear what I thought to be the grunt of a bear. Nonetheless, sounds of something came from all around me. Nothing to create alarm, but as time went on the feeling of needing to get off that mountain got worse until about 6:30 p.m. when I finally said, $12 for a bear or mountain lion hunting tag was not worth my life. Considering if things went bad, I had to get the 150 to 200 yards to the four-wheeler, then the mile down the mountain to my truck, then drive 2 miles out of the canyon to phone service before I could phone for help. I noped the hell out of there and hurried to the four-wheeler while constantly looking over my shoulder, still with that same feeling in my stomach. After getting back to my truck, the feeling disappeared, leaving me nervous and shaky from the experience. That night I camped at the mouth of the canyon, not wanting to be near that area. That night I slept in my truck due to the wind and fear of what was potentially on the mountain with me. At one point I stepped out of my truck to take a piss and heard some sort of unnatural growl, causing me to jump back in and lock my doors while shining a flashlight everywhere. Possibly it was just my nerves and tree branches rubbing due to the wind that night, but I wasn't taking any chances. I never saw what caused that horrible feeling that afternoon. But I've learned to trust my gut when it comes to bad feelings and get the hell out of the area. I'm torn as to what was on that mountain with me, but the other part says it's best to remain in the dark. It still haunts me months later and I'm still worried while out. The mountains and woods. I know that both weapons I was carrying could easily take down any dangerous game I would encounter, but I still felt helpless. For context, my rifle was a Savage 111 chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, big round, and my sidearm was the Glock 40 and 10mm auto, which is popular among Alaskan big game guides for bear defense and well known to stop a charging grizzly. If anyone has any idea as to what could have been on that mountain, it'd be nice to get an idea. This happened a few years ago. It was about 9 p.m. and I was returning from practice. I would say I'm a pretty paranoid guy and usually overthink stuff. As I was walking down the road, I had this terrible gut feeling, like my heart dropped. I immediately felt like I should look behind me. I turned around and saw a man, pretty muscular, around his middle 30s, staring at me. I froze and suddenly the same gut feeling returned. I don't know why, but I had that urge to scream. The guy actually took off running, probably because he thought I was calling for help. When I got home, I told my parents. I was 14 at the time, and we called the police. A few days later, a police officer knocks on our door and starts asking me questions. He had a picture of the guy from that night. I could tell it was him due to him being bald, and from his muscular body. It turns out they had already caught the guy and just wanted to confirm if it was him. I later find out this guy has been guilty for murder, molestation, etc. He was also carrying a knife the night I saw him. Really messed up guy. This actually happened not too long ago. My fiancé and I were visiting his cousin, and they have a spare mattress we put on the floor in the living/dining area for us to sleep at night. Their bathroom and bedrooms are all upstairs, and this is an old-ass creaky and literally tilted on an angle to the side house. You physically cannot walk silently anywhere, the house is just not in good shape and their landlord does nothing about it. So, to get to the actual story now that some needed info has been given. I was asleep next to him, and woke up to him getting out of bed and going upstairs. Heard him go up, rolled over and waited for him to come back since I'd just get woken up again anyway by the stairs. For a few minutes I laid there, and suddenly I heard an extremely labored and wheezing inhale from next to me in bed. Thinking I'd fallen asleep, I rolled over to see if my fiancé was okay, put my arm out and he wasn't there. I opened my eyes and looked, the dim light from the street lights giving just enough visibility to see that there was nobody in the bed, nobody in the downstairs at all. Just me. I slowly laid back down and just waited silently for something, and as soon as I had gotten comfortable, I heard the sound of someone coming down the stairs. My fiancé laid down next to me, and I asked him if he was alright, thinking maybe I had dreamed it, despite having been awake, and the fact that his cousin has told us many times that weird things happen in the house. The following day I asked everyone, cousin, her husband, their roommate, my fiancé, if they had been downstairs at all that night. Roommate had been at a friend's house all night and gotten back at 7 a.m. Husband of cousin said he slept solid through the night, didn't even get up to use the bathroom. Cousin says she only got up to use the bathroom, never came downstairs. Fiancé said he never heard anything weird that night. Cousin immediately started freaking out and telling us to just stop talking about it or it'll just get worse. So I stopped talking about it. She, cousin, later messaged me and told me that she's heard the same thing when she's been alone at night, and that weird things started happening again shortly after we left for home, before dying down as quickly as it started. So that's how I found out my cousin's house actually had weird stuff happen in it that can't easily be explained. I'm not saying it's ghosts, ghouls, blah blah blah. There could be a million explanations for what I heard. Could have been the mattress creaking over the floorboards, something rational and reasonable. Still doesn't change the fact it was something weird that happened while I was alone. I was spending a couple of days with my grandma. On the first night, I was trying to sleep in her guest bedroom with my cousin. She decided to go sleep on the pull-out couch in the living room, but I had no idea why. After a while, I distinctly heard the sound of someone walking on gravel outside the bedroom window. I decided to go sleep on the couch with my cousin at that point. What's weird is when we brought up to our grandma, she said there isn't any gravel on that side of the house. We went out there the next day, and sure enough, just grass and dirt. No gravel of any kind. I had been in this bedroom, my grandma always told me and my cousins not to play in there, but it was intriguing to our young minds because of the pictures and stuff that was in there, during the day any number of times, both during this visit and during previous visits when we came as a family. Never once had anything seemed unusual in this room up until that night. I don't remember if I got the courage to look outside the window. One of many, but probably had the most effect on me. Lived in a rented house as a student with 3 other people. We were checking out some cupboards at the top of the stairs and we found a load of love letters and personal stuff, had a laugh at the old-fashioned flirting, moved on with life. Other housemates go home for Christmas, I stick around for a couple of days due to my job. Starts with just general feeling of being watched, tingle on the back of the neck, unheard whispers. Early evening I'm in my room, reading a book and my TV just turns itself on, not even to a channel, just static. Okay. It's getting on a bit, could just be a fault. Turn it off and carry on. My girlfriend told me once she could hear footsteps on the stairs at night. I didn't think much of it, multiple resident students without a sensible body clock between us. Until I hear them. I know I'm there alone. I shut my bedroom door, put the TV on for noise and leave the light on. I'm taking no chances. That is until I wake up having managed to finally fall asleep and things definitely aren't okay. I can't scream, the door is open and I'm hanging half off the bed, my arms stretched towards the door and the darkness beyond it. I finally gain control, grab my keys and run to my car to spend the rest of the night. Next day I pack a few sets of clothes and don't return to that house on my own again. I've never felt relief like the day I moved out for the summer knowing I was moving into a different house the next year. When I was an 18-year-old goth girl, I was working as a hospital porter. I was working an 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, and being the freaky girl would get all the unit to morgue runs. I got one halfway through my shift, 12th floor to the morgue, which was in the sub-basement. Body on a gurney. Loose white sheet. The tiny and frequent wind gusts kept lifting the sheet on the eternal elevator ride. Partly, you tell yourself that this isn't a movie. Don't be a baby. But also, you plan B how you're gonna take down this zombie in the confines of an elevator. So, I get to the sub-basement. The morgue is at the end of a long, dark curving tunnel, past the incinerator. I had never brought anything there that late and found out that the morgue is closed. There is a phone and instructions on the wall. I call security, 2 buildings over, and wait for what felt like forever for a guard to come and escort me in. The weird thing is that by that point in my life I had already worked shadowing an embalmer in a funeral home, so the corpse wasn't foreign to me. But I had never spent that long, alone in creepily lit isolated situations with a body under a sheet. Creepy. Okay, so basically here goes. My parents and little brother decided to leave without me to go get some food in San Jose, and I decided to stay my high school. I came home to find nobody and I decided, well, maybe they will be back soon. So, I locked up the house front, back, windows, you name it. Then after that, I decided to chill in my room and watch some YouTube. I have some pretty good hearing because I heard the water turn on from the outside of the house. Someone was using our hose faucet. I was kind of freaking out because who the fuck does that? Anyways, we have security cameras but ours doesn't record, just surveys I guess. I looked outside to find the hose faucet spouting water and nobody there. I was like, fuck, do I have to go outside? I was going to go outside when I heard the water shut off and a crash in the backyard. I ran to my parents' room, that's where the cameras were, and checked to see the hose faucet fine but the grill in the backyard on the ground. Mind you, we have cameras but there are some blind spots, but nobody really knows these blind spots, especially just a normal person. I look at the backyard camera again to see a figure in the background near one of the blind spots. I was scared shitless. I couldn't tell if it was a person because it was dark, but there seemed to be staring straight into the camera. I don't have a phone. I started to freak out and decided to stay in my parents' room and hide underneath their massive covers. I was 15 at the time. Soon, I check the cameras to see if the figure is gone, and it's right there in front of the camera. Just standing and staring. I couldn't make out any features, so I decided to just try to sleep. I hear the garage open, and to my relief, it's my family. They had arrived. I checked the camera again to see if the figure was still there, only to notice the grill was back in its original position. I ran to the front door and told my mom everything. She said I must have fallen asleep. I still question it to this day. My parents were moving house when I was 15. I decided to sleep at the new house and do yard work during the day to fix it up. I worked on a sewing project in the living room at night. The house was empty aside from my air mattress. The house is in the middle of nowhere on 1.5 acres of land with cornfields all around it. It was a schoolhouse in the late 1800s. One night, I'm sewing and listening to music when I hear what sounds like the garage door opening. There was no lights from any cars leading up to the driveway, so I was confused at first and texted my parents to ask if they were there. Nope. I went to the door that connected the garage to the house and locked it, then stood next to the door. I heard what sounded like someone dragging a metal object along the cement floor. I then called my parents and put the phone close to the door. They could hear it too. The noise lasted for at least an hour until my parents showed up all freaked out with a weapon for defense. The garage door was closed. I never heard it close, and the noise stopped as they were pulling into the driveway. My only justification of the experience is that someone must have broken in and traveled through the cornfield afterwards. It should also be noted that the sound was never entirely consistent. It was occasionally loud enough that I could hear it in the living room, but sometimes quiet enough to hear it only when I was near the door. Sometimes it sounded like the object was bounced along the ground, a hollow metal sound. Other times it sounded like it was being dragged. That house always made me feel uncomfortable after that. I work in a pretty old building that was converted from being a house to a hair salon. I'm the receptionist, so I'm always the last one out when I work closing shifts, and I've seen some creepy shit there. Everybody who works there has heard the sinks turning on and off in the back when no one's there, or the back door opening and no one coming in, or something move on its own. Absolute creepiest thing was one time when I closed one night and opened again in the morning. I was the last one out and everything was cleaned up and back in its place. I set the alarm and locked up. The next morning, I came back, unlocked the doors, turned off the alarm, so I knew for sure no one else had been there. Back in our break room, we used to have a big heavy chest of drawers where we kept the color supplies. We kept these big bottles of bleach in cabinets on the bottom shelf. They're pretty heavy and have wide, flat bottoms. There's not a good way for these to fall over on their own. When I came in that morning, 2 cupboards were open and like 15 of these bottles were spilled out across the whole floor. More recently, we stopped using the cabinet and moved it into the bathroom. One night as I was walking out of the bathroom, there was the loud crack behind me and I looked back to find one of the drawers and it was pushed all the way back. I don't know for sure if that one was a ghost or something, but I don't think it was like that before. Another time, I had just locked up the door behind the last of my coworkers. It's a pretty small building, so I knew I was alone. I went to use the bathroom before heading out, and as soon as I closed the door I heard a woman start talking right on the other side of it. She said a couple sentences. It was sort of mumbled and I couldn't understand it, but it definitely sounded like human speech. I've never heard a sound like that besides that one time, so I don't think it was anything else in the building. Sometimes when I visit my brother, who lives out of town, I will spend the night and drive back home the next day. Usually there is no room to sleep in the bedrooms on the main floor. This is a ranch bungalow, so I sleep in the bedroom down in the basement. Every time I have slept there, I wake out of a sound sleep in the early morning hours and feel as though I am being watched. Very often, my brother or sister-in-law come out to the living room to find me camped out on their couch in the morning, because I feel very uneasy after waking up prematurely like this. The basement is quite creepy and I never seem to last a full night sleeping downstairs without being disturbed by something. I have been told that one of his daughters absolutely refuses to sleep downstairs when she comes home to visit because it is too creepy. One time a few years ago I visited my brother and they had just gotten a cat the said niece had brought home. This cat was one of those beautiful tortoiseshell creatures who was young and had the 3 black stripes running down her back. Unfortunately, she was quite feral and would lash out at anyone who approached her. Very bad temper, very antisocial and liked to be left completely alone. After a day's visit and socializing, well lubricated with beers, I went to bed downstairs and left the door to the basement bedroom open for air circulation. Again, in the early morning hours, I was awoken by something trying to drag the covers off me, and this time it was the cat who was desperately trying to rouse me out of my sleep. The cat was meowing frantically and appeared to be quite upset by something as she jumped up and down on top of me to wake me up. In my grogginess, I thought the cat was finally being friendly and I tried to comfort her, but she continued to meow frantically and jumped off the bed, then ran towards the bedroom door, which was now closed. When I went to bed, the door was open and the house was quiet as everyone else had retired for the night. Nobody would have come into the basement. The doorknob was jiggling madly and the door was shaking on its hinges as the cat continued to howl desperately. I got up and angrily yanked the door open, thinking I was being pranked, only to find nobody on the other side. As soon as I opened the door, the cat scurried out and disappeared somewhere in the bowels of the house. I again felt as though something menacing was watching me, ready to strike. I hurried upstairs and again camped out on the couch in the living room. I later told my sister-in-law what happened, and she smiled knowingly, agreed there was something very creepy about their basement. Now, whenever I visit my brother, I stay at a hotel or Airbnb to ensure I don't get spooked anymore. When I lived in OC, California, I had a roommate, whom I shared a house with. My bedroom was upstairs and his was downstairs. The house was built in the 1950s and still had the original wood floors including wood stairs. A few days after I moved in, I began to hear noises at night. I figured it was my roommate walking around at night and I didn't pay too much attention. One night I was laying in bed reading a book and I heard someone walking up the stairs and then down the hall. The steps stopped right outside my door. I thought it was my roommate coming to my room to ask me something, and I waited to hear him knock. A few moments passed, and in thought, why hasn't he knocked? I got up and opened the door and there was nobody there. I hadn't heard steps walking back downstairs, so I thought, that was weird. I didn't think that it was creepy or anything supernatural and I went to bed. The next night I heard the same sounds of steps coming up the stairs and to my door. When I opened the door, again there was no one there. After a few more times that this happened, I asked my roommate if he had been upstairs and he said no. He also told me that he had been hearing sounds of steps at night. One day I was talking to the next door neighbor, who was the original owner of his house and knew the last owners. He told me that the previous owners had a son that had committed suicide by hanging himself from the garage rafters back in the 1970s. Turns out that my bedroom was his bedroom. I'm getting the chills just writing about this. I used to work as a legal assistant at a law firm downtown. The building was one of many antebellum houses that had been refurbished and turned into businesses, doctors' offices, etc. One morning, I had gotten to work early, and the office's rule was first one to work, opens the building. Now, first, let me paint you a picture of the interior of this building. When you enter the side door from the employee parking lot, there is a large, open office immediately to your right and an out-of-order elevator to your left. You then have to walk down a long, narrow hallway into the kitchen, break room, before you finally reach the first light switch. Now, you're next to a short, crooked hallway into an even larger, open office. The light switch is at the opposite end. Then a saloon door opens into another hallway. This was my office/reception area. So, that morning was particularly dark and dreary and I was dreading going into the office alone. I was raised with a healthy dose of superstition. I unlocked the door and went inside. It was so dark inside I had to run my hands along the walls to find my way around. When I finally got to the kitchen, I was finally able to turn on the first light. Now for my next challenge. I never liked the crooked hallway into my office. Something about it always felt off. When I was at my desk, my back always faced that hallway and I constantly felt like someone was watching me. Anyways, I took a deep breath and power walked to the other side of my office and the second light switch. I stepped out of the office through the saloon door and turned to close it, and what I saw froze me in my tracks. Now looking back at the crooked hallway, I could make out the figure of a man, crouching down and covering his head. He appeared to be wearing an old, military uniform. I blinked and he was gone. Once I finally caught my breath, I ran to the bathroom and locked myself inside until I heard one of my coworkers come inside. I quit that job a few weeks later. So, I'm a city kid, but I have loads of country-type people in my family. I'm probably the first honest city kid on my dad's side, but I love the countryside. My great-grandfather and grandparents at the time lived in 2 farmhouses with only 2 middle-aged neighbors, and behind my great-grandfather's house was woodland, the other side a lot of motorway between fields. What I'm saying is that the only people who ever entered this forest were middle ages or elderly people or me. When I turned 14, I was allowed to go out alone. I knew a path and went exploring down it, and made a diversion, and explored a path I hadn't seen before. It was the middle of the day, so no real danger, and I came across something on the side of the path that was incredibly weird. There was plastic chairs, a plastic table, teapots and teacups, and a couple of dolls sat on a couple of the tables. 14-year-old me was fascinated by this, and took a look around, looked at the dolls. Nothing creepy happened, and I continued on my exploration down to the one river that went through this section of forest, and then returned home. I swore down what I had seen, but not even my great-grandfather had ever seen or heard about the tea party in the forest. I swore up and down, telling them it was just off the path that they told me they went on walks down all the time, and they said there was no such path. So I went back out into the forest the next day to prove it was there. I found the path, found the trail, and found the remains of the tea party. The dolls were gone, the chairs were torn, the cups and teapot shattered. I found everything that had been there, even though one of the chairs would have had to have been carried and set down, still standing, far down the trail, without being damaged at all. But there was no sign of those 2 dolls. I knew I was right, and I knew where the tea party was. I went back, and swore on it, and said I'd take them to see it. They went there, and found the path. They were amazed they hadn't seen the path before, but when I went down, the entire tea party set was gone, even the broken bits, except for that one plastic chair, still where it had been before. Ever since that day, I've had an extreme, crippling fear of dolls. And everyone thinks I was making up a story, and I'll swear to this day, I didn't make it up. Even writing it now, I can feel my own skin crawling. It was honestly terrifying, the whole experience, and it gets scarier the older I get, And the more I understand the horrible implications that could be involved with a tea party in the middle of a forest. This story is about my nephew. He wasn't technically alone when this happened. You will soon understand why. It was a normal Saturday for me and my side of the family. I would usually awake to the television on in the living room with cartoons, and my mom would usually either be cooking a meal or on the telephone with someone. I awake to my mom talking on the phone in the living room. I walk into the living room and my mom's voice changes drastically. My sister was on the phone with her and I could hear the fear in my sister's voice. I could also feel an evil sense of energy in the air. I just knew something was up to no good. I asked her what was happening and she gave me the finger 1 second on the phone finger. My mom then set the phone down and says she will be right back, that my sister needed some help with something. I begged my mom to not leave me alone in the house. She told me I wouldn't want to go anyways. I stayed home and my mom took off to my sister's home, which was not far. I was sitting on the couch watching television when that sense of fear intensifies. I feel like I'm being watched and all the hairs on my body shoot up. I don't want to move even though it is daylight outside. The closest on the end of the hallway was frightening me for no absolute reason. I ignore my fear and eventually my mom comes walking inside praying under her breath. I ask her what had happened and at first she didn't want to tell me. She eventually sat down with me and told me the entire story. She said when my sister had called her she was already crying and asking her to come over as fast as she could. My sister said that she got up and her son wasn't in the bedroom, but he was in the living room closet, and he was talking to someone inside of the closet. My fear I felt never got bigger. I was about to say something about what I was feeling but she continued. She told me that when she got to the house my sister was crying and praying that nobody was with my nephew in that closet. Both of them eventually get the courage to check the closet and my nephew was sitting there and he says he remembers who he was talking to. He said he was talking to a girl in the closet, but the girl had hairy legs and a hairy body, and black eyes. My mom and my sister rebuked the fact that he even said this and demanded whoever was in the closet to leave. And I think she did. I think she left and went straight to my closet when they prayed over it. I never told my mother what happened because I never saw fear in my mom's eyes. And at that moment, I saw my mom scared to her core. And I never knew exactly why, even though I too was scared.